So again, here in Revit, if you wanna start working in Dynamo, you need to be inside a project. I'm going to start with a new conceptual mass. So I said briefly last time that in 2018 probably doesn't matter as much, but because things are a bit changing. But usually when you are doing a massing or a form thing, it's better to be in your conceptual massing environment because there are reference points and other things available to you that may not be available in an architectural Revit project. And for that reason, if you define a point in Dynamo and you want to bring it into your Revit, it's better to have an environment that is built for that. Okay, so whenever you're here, you can go and manage and open Dynamo. And your Dynamo will open up. There. Okay. So usually when you have two screens, it's very useful to have Dynamo on one screen and your actual environment on the other one so that you can see the results at the same time. But the good thing is that in Dynamo you always have a background that shows your stuff, and I showed you guys where different controls are, so if you wanted to turn on your grid, that's where you go. So very quickly, the thing that I ended last, what's happening here? Okay, so there are different ways of accessing things in Dynamo. So one way is to go and explore this library. That's the first thing I recommend you guys to do. So just go open them and explore and see what's there. These are kind of the tools and the sets of equipments that you have to use, different widgets that you can combine. So it's always good to know what is there for you. If there is something specific you're trying to find, you can search for it and type in something in the search menu, or even faster than that, you can right click on the screen and type in what you want. So to start, I'm just going to get a point, so point by coordinates, and then whenever it shows, it's very slow, whenever it shows something, you can go, whenever you type in a command, you can go in and wait on the widget and I will explain what this thing does. So studying those is also a very useful exercise. So I've got a point, by default it's at 0, 0, and 0. You can see when I hover over them, it gives me the value, so it shows the value to be 0. Also down here, it gives me the result, so it's a point. If I stay here, it's a point at x, y, and z of 0, 0, and 0, and that's the output. So these are the inputs, that's the output, and the data flow is from left to right. If I want to change a few of these numbers, I can put in number, and it gives me the number widget. Then I can plug this in and say my x, which we can see here, that's the point. Instead of being 0, I want it to be 5, and then now this thing is changing. Another thing that we all like a lot is the sliders that you have seen in Grasshopper already. There are two types of sliders in Dynamo. So number slider and integer slider. They're obvious what they do. So you can pick whatever you want, and then you will bring this in. There's a down arrow here that you can press and change the properties of your slider. So the minimum, the maximum, and the steps. A lot of times, because we are switching between units, between metric and imperial, inches and millimeters and meters, these numbers may go crazy. So a lot of times it's easier for us to work with 0 to 100 or whatever in this scale, but a lot of times it happens that instead of 100, because it's in millimeters, you need to have a way bigger number, and then to make it a bit easier, you can change your step to something a bit bigger so that proportionally you are still within the same scale kind of thing. So for now, I'm going to make it at 100 and this to be 0.1. Close that off and connect it to my y, and then you can see this data is feeding my y of the point, and when I'm changing it, the y is going in and back. Okay, I also said that you can double click and rename things. That's useful because in the future you always go back and you want to edit your stuff, or in a few months you want to come back and see your scripts and they may not make a lot of sense to you, so it's good to put in hints for yourself. so that you can remember it later. In the way to connect the wires, as I said last time, is to click and click. And the way to disconnect them is to click and click on an open space. So that's how do you connect and disconnect. Versus in Grasshopper, you were dragging stuff in. That's not going to work. You need to click. The way to copy and paste stuff is very simple as anything else. You can just select them and Control-C, Control-V. It will give you a copy. Or you can select something and hold Control down and drag it somewhere else. And then it will make a copy with the connections already established. So that's also something that is useful to have. Okay. So now we have made a point, which is over here. And if you look at our thing over there, you can see that's the scale thing. So when I zoom in, now I can see that this is very close to the center, but in real life it has this kind of a distance. So if I go back and I really move it out, it's moving very slowly there. So I will give it a bigger number. So that, and then this, and then I can move that maybe there. So now it's more obvious that this point is moving. So this is a point by coordinate that I made, but I could also make a reference. Where did it go? A reference. I can also make a reference point. No. Reference point by coordinates. Let's find it. So by coordinates, create a reference point by x, y, and z coordinates. Another thing that is good to know in Dynamo environments, you type in something and it gives you 100 different options, and it's always confusing for all of us to find the right thing because there are things that are very close to each other. So there's a command for select surface, there's a command for select surfaces. So there are very small differences between the widgets that makes them too many. So be aware of that. You may need to type in and really look for what you're looking for. But anyways, I'm going to delete the point that I made at the beginning, and now I've got a reference point here, and I've got a number slider that is over there. The reason I put in the reference point is that my Revit environment can read that instead of the point thing that couldn't be read. So now going back to Revit, I'm going to go under Create, and I'm going to pick this curve thing and draw a curvature, but halfway through I'm going to snap to the reference point that I made in Dynamo. So I'm going to snap to this and then go here and go there, and that's my curvature. Now what's interesting is that I can control this point in my Dynamo. So when I move that, the curve will move with it, and if I make this number a bit bigger, you can see that the result is a bit more dramatic. So I can control stuff that I draw in Revit by using Dynamo. Okay. The other thing is that, okay, let's say we drew this. Let me just delete that. Okay. Anything you wanted to draw here, it's very easy. So you want to draw a circle. You would type in a circle, and then you would explore your options for drawing that circle. So circle by center point and radius. So we'll just bring that in. It will show up here. So it's asking for a center point. So I need to have a point. In this case, I'm gonna put in point by coordinates again. So things are acting a little bit weird today. So please bear with me. Okay, so that's the point, and now I need to have a radius for it. I can just use the same slider that I had, so I will drag it in there. Now I've got a circle here. As you can see, it could be as big or small as I want it to be, and if I Control B and go, so another thing is that you can see your geometry in your Dynamo environment, and you can switch between your widgets and your geometry by pressing Control B or these two at the top. So you can see the circle here with the radius changing, and it's a huge one. So that's the circle. And then you would put in stuff to give you some data. You would place other things on top of it. So let's say I put in the circle, I extrude it afterwards, I do some other stuff with that extrusion, and then at some point I don't want to see the circle anymore. So the way to do that is to right click on the widget and say don't preview this for me. So it is there, the circle still exists, I can get stuff out of it. It's sitting here in this output, but it's not just showing up. So that's a preview you can turn on and off. Same thing you were doing in Grasshopper. And then there's also a few other things that you can do here. So you can select a few of these widgets and make a group. This is also a very good way of organizing your documents. So this is my new group of creating a circle or whatever, and you can also give it a description or a name here. So grouping and renaming and organizing your things is very key and important. Okay, so let's create a few different things. I'm just going to close this and make a new file. Alright, so we did how we could do points. I'm going to just put it here somewhere. We saw how we could do numbers with sliders or with number inputs. You can also do sequences of numbers. So there are two different types of sequencing. So one is the sequence, the other one is the range. I'm going to show you guys both so that you can kind of see the difference. So if I'm not wrong, and on the range, I usually I am usually wrong in these two. But in the range, you have the start, you have the end, and you have the steps in between. In the sequence, you have the start, you have the number of steps, and the size of the steps defined. So both of them will give you an array of numbers, but the way you have control over them is a bit different. So I'm gonna just show you guys those, and then we can test them and see what each of them do. Then we can play with the points and connect them to these guys and explore a little bit. Okay. Last time I said there is a widget called Watch. Using Watch, you can, like panel in Grasshopper, you can see what's happening in your world. So right now it shows me, okay, this sequence thing is an empty list. My start is 0, my amount I want it to be 1, my step I want it to be 1. Now I have a list of only 0. If my step is 10 and my number is 5 or 4, now you can see I've got 4 numbers between 0, the step size is 10, and I've got 4 steps, and I start from 0. So 0, 10, 20, and 30 is the thing that I get out of it. If I start from a different number, I will keep the same step size, and it will keep the same number size. So 5, 15, 25, and 35. In range, if I use the same numbers, and if I use the watch, I will connect this. I will give it 5 to start, 10 to end, step to be 4. Now what it does is, let me change that to 1. So what it does is it will start from 0, it will end somewhere around 10, and the step sizes are 4. So with the step sizes being 4, it could fit 3 numbers here in between for me. If I put in 1.2, now the step sizes are smaller, it could put in more numbers in for me, so it's a bigger number of numbers in this sequence. Now I can connect these to, is it clear or is it very confusing? Because it's kind of confusing for me. Now I've made 2 sequences of numbers, as you saw. I can connect these to my points. So before we were giving these guys a single number, and it was making a single point for us. Now, instead of doing that, I can give them a sequence of numbers, and it will give me a sequence of points. As you can see here, I've got 4 points. That's the number I defined here. Or if I give them the range, it again creates a row of points here. So I'm gonna, for now, just get rid of the range, just work with the sequence, give it to the X, and then make this guy 0. Keep this step at 5 and give a slider to the amount so that you can control that. So I want slider, I want it to be number slider, and I give that to the amount, and I add to it. Now I've got a series of points here. Okay, going back, I make a copy of the whole thing. So what this tool does, it's making a sequence, and it's making a row of, or an array of points out of that. In this case, now I want to change my Z to a different number. So my Z now, instead of being 0, is 10. Now I've got 2 rows of points. I want to create lines between those points. So I will right click and say line. When I type in line, there's a line by start point and end point, so I would pick that. I would give these points as start point and these points at end points, and it would connect all these points and would give me all these lines here, there. The height of them I can control with the Z number over there. Okay. Now what I wanted to do, in this case I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, and 9 points at each side. What would happen if one of these guys had more points? So let's add a few more points to the one on the top and see what's going to happen. So for now, nothing is changing. So it is doing the shortest connection possible. You were also dealing with this in Grasshopper. I don't know how much of it was explained to you, but in Dynamo, it is called lacing. There you can see there is a single line here, and if you right click, you can go change that lacing. That's how 2 different lists are connected. I'm going to just draw it on the board. If there is a marker around here, there are no markers, so I'm going to just show it here on the screen. Wow. Awesome. Thank you. Now we got markers. Okay. So, sorry for the time that you're listening to this on YouTube, but I'm on the board. So if you got 3 points on 2 different lists, so this is list 1 and this is list 2, and then you have your lacing at the shortest. Let's say on this one you got 4 points. The connection will be between the shortest amount, so the shortest list will be the master, and it will connect to all that it can. The second option you have is the longest. If you do that, it will connect to the longest list. So this list has 4 items, and it will keep this as the master. It will connect all 4 to all 3. So that's the longest. You also have something that starts with cross. It could be cross-referenced or something like that. And then what it does is that any single point from each of the list is connected to any single point from the other one. So what's going to happen is this, that, this, that. So now every single item from each of the list is connected to every single item from the other one. A lot of times when you are doing scripting, that's causing issues for you because you have 2 lists, you want them to do something for you and it's not doing it correctly. It's because the way you're defining the connection is not right. So same thing here. If I right click here under lacing, it says shortest. If I change that to longest, then it will connect to all these points from the top. And if I right click again and say do the cross product, it will connect everything. So you can see here 3 X's means it's set on cross product. Longest have 3 lines with 1 at an angle, and shortest have only 1 line. So those are the different lacing options that you have. 50% of the time when you are running into an issue in your script, when everything looks fine, this is the reason. Okay, so let's keep this simpler and don't go to that lacing issue. So I'm gonna use okay, now I'm only using 1 sequence for this. So start is that, the amount is this. I want to make the steps a little bit smaller. make the numbers a bit more bigger. Okay. Now I've got a top and a bottom. The y's are at 0. One more thing that you can do is to play with the inputs you can place into your model. So I'm going to use a sine function here. So I would connect the result out of the sequence to the sine, and the result out of that to the y. And it's not very clear. I'm going to make it a bit tighter so that it's more clear. And I'm going to go in there and zoom in. Okay. I missed the point. So there's a radian to degrees that I can change that to this. Now you can see my top part. Y's on the top series of points are reading a sine function, and the ones on the bottom are just simple lines. And then when I can continue this kind of this row, it would just continue going through that sine thing. So the way it works is that you just have a number, you change from radians to degrees, and you know what the differences are in that. If not, I can explain it. And then you would get that degrees to the angle, it would change that to the sine value of it, and then it will give you this effect. Okay.